Hi folks, I'm Craig Taylor, and as always a huge thanks for joining me here on my YouTube channel, the Bushcraft Padawan. If you've been watching my videos recently, a couple of weeks ago I talked about the fact that I was going to go away for a week in the woods with Paul Kirtley, his team from Frontier Bushcraft and a number of other people on a course called the Woodcrafter. If you've not seen that video yet, then I'm linking to it up here right now, so you can go back and have a look at what my motivations were for doing a course in the first place and what I wanted to get out of this specific course. What I'm also going to do is each morning of the course I'm going to post a little video diary as to what happened the day before. I'm not going to record it at the end of the day because I know from these courses they can finish quite late sometimes. I've lost the light and really all I want to do is get in my sleeping bag and go to sleep, so I'll be recording it each morning. So this is Monday morning. We arrived here probably about it was later than that, probably about 6-7 o'clock last night. Had a tour of the camp, safety rules, some good etiquette rules for being in this particular woodland. We then went away and set up our tarps, tents, hammocks, whatever it was that people were choosing to sleep in. There's about 10 of us on the course. We then met back up again in the teaching area under a parachute around the fire, and Paul gave us a lowdown on what the course was about, how it was going to run. At the same time he was cooking us on a Dutch oven in the middle of the teaching area a huge vegetable a huge vegetable chili. It was lovely. Lots to go around and then some to spare. We all introduced ourselves and I got the opportunity to tell people why I was here. You know, the whole from felling to firewood and everything in between is something that I'm interested in doing. Enhancing my camp cooking skills is something else, and also the tree and plant idea, and in particular the desire to try and find some wild garlic while I'm out here because I'm unsuccessful so far in finding any. So a very, very short day one, wasn't even day one really, the evening before the course starts. Very, very short video log here. Hopefully more to come tomorrow morning and the morning after that and the morning after that, again covering what's happened during the preceding day. Today we're supposed to be looking at different types of axes, the anatomy of an axe, safety and care of an axe, and all things axe related. I get the sense of that. We're going to be doing some chopping. I think Paul also mentioned we were going to be starting to set up some larger camp areas because we're expecting some rain later in the week, so it makes sense to set them up today. And all of the campcraft and skills that are going with setting up those larger, more semi-permanent camp areas. So I'll see you tomorrow morning. Morning folks, it's Tuesday morning, so it's that time to have a look back on yesterday, which usually is Monday, which was proper day one of the course. So what did we cover? When you write it down, it's a hell of a lot to think we went back and covered it in just a day. We started at about 9 in the morning, finished about 10, half 10 at night. Well, that included my group sort of sitting around having a chat. So the things we went through, we started off by having a really thorough look at axes. We looked at very, very small, both in size and weight, specialist axes. We then moved up and looked at kind of medium, general, kind of all-purpose or good enough for all-purpose axes, and then we moved up to very, very heavy, lengthy, weighty specialist axes again. So we kind of moved through the whole spectrum of axes. Learned a lot there in terms of the specialist axes and what they can be used for. Some interesting aspects there. We looked at some metal wedges, and quite interesting to see the way that they were shaped to help split the wood. I'm looking forward to doing that later on this week, because hopefully that the wood that I've got some permission for, I'm going to have permission to fell some smaller trees myself and split them in the coming week. So really, really interested in looking at that aspect. And what it appears is that the axe that I've got, which is the Hultafors Classic hunting axe, or the Hultafors Classic axe, seems to be a good choice in terms of a general-ish, all-round, relatively small and light axe. I'm quite pleased that I made that decision about a year or so ago. It seems to be coming to fruition. So we looked at length in axes, which is no surprising because they're going to form the core part of the tools that we use. We then looked at saws, and we looked at improvised saws, buck saws, we looked at homemade saws, we looked at specialist purchase saws, and again it was good to see that the saw that my dad made me, that hasn't had much use, I must admit, I must pull my finger out and start using that, that we got the opportunity to use one of those yesterday as well. We then used the axe to fashion some tent pegs, and I don't mean small tent pegs that you might use for your tarp, but those very large, chunky, hefty tent pegs that you tend to see used for big shelters, or even marquees, those big wooden stakes. We all fashioned a couple of those that we used later on in the day. That was a good exercise, I think, in getting to grips with using the axe, both for splitting the wood, so something fairly heavy, and then for actually carving the wood down. So a nice all-round use of the axe to help create those tent pegs. We then went on to split it, or prior to that we did some splitting wood, and Paul showed us a technique that is as safe as it gets really when it comes to using an axe, and kind of goes against the convention that you normally see of wood being stood up, someone standing up and hitting it with the axe. This was all done much more delicately, is not the right word, but much more low-key, much less aggressive if you like, but still achieved the end result and was safer as well. So that's a technique that I was aware of. It's something that I do use myself, but we took it to the nth degree yesterday and started to develop quite a bit of muscle memory because we chopped a lot of wood, or it felt like we chopped a lot of wood. We then went off out of the campsite and we coppiced some sweet chestnuts, and we also took down some younger silver birch that were starting to kind of overpopulate an area. We took those back to camp, and Paul, after a brief introduction into, or reminder of knife safety for some and an introduction to knife safety for others, he showed us how to fashion a adjustable pot hanger, which we did. We then put that pot hanger to one side, and we went over and we broke down into 3 groups, and we were given a large tarp, and we used that to fashion a very high off the ground group shelter. This kind of thing that someone that, you know, I'm 6'2", I could very easily walk underneath and out of it without having to crouch down. So he showed us some principles of using heavier ropes, some tightening techniques, some knots that I'm familiar with, such as the timber hitch, but I've never actually used in anger, so it was good to be able to see that put into practice for a real purpose. And again, I certainly remember this when it comes to going in the woods and the community woodland that I'm fortunate enough to have permission in. They often have these large tarps up, so I remember those techniques, some of those techniques for that in the future. Once the tarp was up, once we had a pot hanger, once we had the tent pegs that we used to secure the tarp, we then went on and we were all given a Dutch oven, and I cooked my first meal in the Dutch oven last night along with the guys, which was a tuna and pasta and vegetable casserole, if you like, for want of a better word. It's quite precarious doing that because although we built the pot hanger, those Dutch ovens are heavy. Fill them with 4 grown men's worth of food and then some, and they become very heavy. So it was encouraging to see that pot hanger actually do its job and not just launch our food all over the floor and all over the fire. So all in all, it was a good day. It was a tiring, or it felt like it was a tiring, long first day. I'm sure there'll be many more of those to come, but it was just very, very good to see all of these different small component parts that I'd either heard of or read about or always thought about. Once again, the opportunity to actually put them into practice, to be shown how to do them properly and safely by a team that clearly knows what they're doing. So that was a recap of day 1. As I say, today's Tuesday morning, so I will see you tomorrow morning for a recap on what we've covered today. Good morning, folks. It's Wednesday morning, so by my reckoning yesterday was Tuesday, which means that it was day 2 proper of the course. So let's have a look back at what we covered during day 2. First thing we did after breakfast was that Ian, one of the Frontier Bushcraft team, took us away and we set up a permanent or semi-permanent camp shower area, and we talked about the things around siting, that where it should be sited, and screening and the process for setting it up and so on and so forth. And that was closely linked with a talk by Paul on the importance of hygiene in any camp, but especially in mid to long-term camps as well. Once we've done that, we then went for a couple of kilometres walk, no more than that, pretty much in the direction behind where I'm sitting now. Actually, we walked in that general direction, and we as a group coppiced several pieces of, let me get this right, hazel. We were primarily looking for stuff that was sort of 7 to 8 foot, almost ramrod straight, fairly even diameter, very few knots or tree or branches emanating from that, because what we were going to do when we brought it back to camp was we were going to make an improvised bow saw out of it. Whilst we were harvesting that hazel, we were also asked to keep an eye out for anything, any offcuts if you like, that could be used for almost immediate pot hanger, something that was kind of, you know, almost ready to go. With just a few whips of the knife or axe, we could turn that into a pot hanger. We brought that back to camp, we placed that to one side, and then we dropped off the other side of the top of this hill that we're on, and we found a lot of dead oak, and we harvested that, some big old pieces, some 2-man lifts on the shoulder, getting that back up the hill, back to the camp area. And the reason that we were harvesting the oak was because after that we then got a large fire going with oak on it, so it was very hot and long burning, and Paul took us through the process of turning those 7 or 8 foot pieces of hazel, how to use heat to gradually bend them and straighten them into, we almost had a U shape that we could tie off, and we could go through a specific process to make a bow saw, which I did. I was quite pleased with it. I cut about 2 or 3 pieces of log with it, and unfortunately I suspect that the piece of hazel that I selected was just a little too thin, and it actually cracked. So whilst it is still functional as a bow saw, absolutely, the depth of the wood that I can cut has reduced, and I suspect as I use it more and more, it will eventually crack to a point where I need to create a new piece. But it was a good process, it was an interesting process, and it was one of those things that has kind of I've now lodged away in the back of my head to do as a little project with Finley and Evie, my son and daughter, when I get back. I think they'll like the process of doing that, because it is quite amazing to see this very, very straight, taut piece of wood eventually being able to be bent into a U shape without cracking, and stay in that shape with some clever knots and tensioning. So it was a good process. I think they'll enjoy doing that. So we made the bow saw. Linked to that, Paul took us through a little talk about types of saw for outdoor use, selection, specifically the type of blades to use. That I'm going to make sure when I get back home, the folding saw that my dad made me some time ago, I'm going to take another look at the blade that's on that and make sure that it's the one that's kind of dual purpose. You know, it will ideally cut both green wood, green wet wood, and also dry wood as well. So it's a good all-round knife, good all-round saw blade. So I'm going to keep an eye out for that. The rest of the oak that we brought up, we then cut that down using a bow saw. Paul took us through some techniques for chopping that safely, and I had a go at that, and I think the thing that I took away was to slow down on the speed, which increases the accuracy and lets the axe do a lot of the work. So I would say half to 3/4 of us had a go at splitting some very, very old seasoned oak, some very tough oak, with a splitting axe yesterday. So that was good fun. Once we'd done that, Paul gave us the ingredients and talked us through a simple recipe for creating a lamb casserole. We used some more of the split oak to create a nice, hot, steady, long burning bed of embers, and we, the 4 of us, myself, Jim, Rich and Gordon, who's come over all the way from Oz, indirectly via San Francisco, to do the course. We created a bloody cauldron full, several helpings we had each, of this lovely lamb casserole. And then at the very end of the day, once that was finished, there was an optional session, because it wasn't technically part of the curriculum, for anybody that wanted to hang around under the teaching teaching parachute, and Paul went through what would have been a revision in knife sharpening for some and an introduction to knife sharpening for others, and I made sure that I went along and took a look at that. So it's always interesting when I read these things out, I kind of look back and think, is that all we did yesterday? And that might be what you're thinking as the viewer, but as I'm sure many of you appreciate, once you're actually doing it and the process is being taught through and several people are doing it and there's a group of people asking questions, those things do stretch out all in all, another very, very, very busy day too. Lots to take on board. I'm going to enjoy going away after this and looking through my notes in more detail, and already I'm starting to identify some projects for me to reattempt or try for the first time when I get back home. Big takeaway for me yesterday though was, it might seem like a simple thing, but I know that oak is long burning. I know that oak is hot burning. I know this. I've said this to people. I've heard this many times, but I don't ever actually recall myself cooking on oak. There's not a great deal of it dead standing in the woods that I use, or there's none that I've ever found. So it was just interesting to take this theory that I'm comfortable with and actually see it in practice. And as I mentioned to my group yesterday evening, if we put the same amount of sweet chestnut on as we did the night before, it's gone very, very quickly. Put that same amount of oak on and it just keeps going and going and going. So it was nice to see that and experience that for real, rather than just be able to wax lyrical about the theory of it. So that was day two, Tuesday over. It's now the morning of day 3, Wednesday, so I'll see you in about 24 hours time, or not if you're watching this on YouTube, and we'll see how Wednesday went. Good morning, it's Thursday morning. Yesterday was Wednesday, so what did we do on Wednesday then? Well, we woke up and Paul took us through, and we all had a huge communal breakfast. Paul took us through some campfire recipes for making pancakes. We all had a huge pile of pancakes and some bacon. What was interesting from that was an alternative firelay that he showed us of crisscrossing the sticks and building up a tower, if you like, of crisscrossed firewood in order to be able to rest the pans on to cook the bacon. And then once that had burnt down, using the embers to cook the pancakes. So an alternative way of arranging the fire, and that was one of the things that I wanted to come on and learn about on the course, was alternative fire arrangements. So we've started to look at those, which is brilliant. After that, we've been using the axe a great deal this week, so we went on to look at axe sharpening techniques, and he introduced us to a hook and a rolling circular method of sharpening the axe. And many of us spent some time yesterday morning bringing our axes back up to speed, having used them a lot in the previous days. We then looked at some alternative methods of splitting logs. So far we'd looked at splitting fairly small logs that you could kind of get your hand around on a stump or on another fallen piece of log. We looked at splitting big pieces of oak on a standing upright log, a very traditional way of splitting logs. If you imagine the romantic notion of log splitting, we did that. But yesterday Paul talked about what happens when you don't have a stump. What happens when you are on rock and you can't just split through the wood into rock because of damaging your axe? What happens when you're on snow and every time you hit the wood it just digs deeper, even into compacted snow? So we looked at a couple of methods of swinging the axe kind of towards ourselves but not towards ourselves, actually between our legs, and splitting the logs that way, and also do an alternative, almost a golf swing in reverse to the side, splitting logs that. And I gave the first one a try and was quite impressed, very impressed with how simple it was, how accurate it was, and how little effort really was needed in order to split the logs quite cleanly. So again, that's something that I'm going to store away and practice as often as I can when I get back home. Once we'd split some larger sweet chestnut rounds of wood down, Paul then took us through a tutorial and a demo of using an axe to carve some cooking utensils. So not spoon carving, but larger spatulas and fish slice type of things. Gave us a demo on that, and we all went away and spent a fair bit of time getting to grips with that. And I was really, really impressed with how quickly, compared to using a knife, I found it easy to use the axe to do a very similar job to carving a spoon. Very, very surprised. Now, there's an element of last time I carved a spoon was the first time I carved a spoon on the elementary bushcraft course. And I don't know what else it was, but I just found, and a lot of other people commented as well. My friend Jim that's on the course, he also said that he found it easier to use the axe than he did using a knife. And at one point, Ian, one of the instructors, came along and stood by me for a while and we were chatting. and he actually said it's good to see you starting to use the axe like you would a knife. And when I stopped and thought about that, I was using it to split, I was using it to cut, I was using it to shave, I was using it almost like a woodworking plane, I was using it like a guillotine to get an angle on the end of the spatula that I was creating. And all in all, I created what I think was a relatively good, for a first time attempt at carving a utensil out of an axe. Very, very pleased with it. I'm actually going to oil it, take it home, and make sure that that joins me on future trips where I'm planning to do some larger range of cooking that this course has taught me. So I'm really pleased with that. It's been one of the highlights of the week so far, was getting to that stage using an axe. We had some lunch. Paul then took us through creating a tripod, which I often do. If you see my previous videos, you'll know I often like cooking using a tripod. However, on this occasion, instead of using paracord to secure the 3 poles and to secure the pot below, he took us through using withies and or using natural material that was lying around to create that hanger. And we all had an attempt at that. All 4 of us in the group teamed together, and we came up with a good, substantial, useful, multi-purpose tripod. And we then, on that, we cooked dinner for the evening, which was guinea fowls, sausages, bacon, wine, some vegetables in there, some white wine, and we reduced that down along with some boiled potatoes and had another very hearty evening meal. Following that, the day was getting quite late now. Paul got us back under the parachute, teaching parachute again in the teaching area, and he talked about axe handle maintenance and showed us a process for, what's the word he used, for taking, I can't remember the word, but essentially what he did was stripped off any of the original or old lacquer and protective finish on the handle, using simply a Stanley knife blade at right angles, scraped all of that off, then went through a process of using boiling water, indirect heat, more Stanley knife blade scraping, boiled linseed oil, some very fine wire wool to bring it back to, I was going to say the original finish, but actually just as we were leaving for the evening, somebody said as good as new. And Paul said actually it's better because the factory finishes on many axes as they come off the production line are okay at best, they're not outstanding. So actually it was a process for getting it back to better than new. Another tiring day, another late finish, loads of information to process, loads of hands-on again, still more firewood, felling, dragging, sawing, splitting, collecting, all that going on, aching in places I'd forgotten that I owned, to be honest, using different muscle groups. But another fantastic day, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens today or tomorrow, depending on how you look at it, on day 4 of the course. Morning folks, it's Friday morning here in the woods, so let's have a look back at what we did on day 4 of the course, which was Thursday. Yesterday, Thursday, was all, well, it wasn't all about, it was a significant chunk of it was about felling trees and what to do once you fell them. And by felling, I don't mean just taking out the bark and taking down some small wrist thickness type dead standing trees for firewood. I'm talking about bigger, substantial trees with a lot of height, with a lot of limbs, with a lot of weight, with a lot of moisture in them, you know, trees that are aimed on the side of being more dangerous to fell than just some dead standing. Paul spent a lot of time in the morning explaining the theory of this. There were lots of diagrams, there were lots of, quite understandably, safety considerations to take into account. And once he'd covered that, we went out into the woods, a little further than we've been going, but not a great deal further, just, you know, an extra 100 metres or so into the woods. And Paul gave a demo of felling a tree, and then of limbing a tree, which is taking off the side branches so you have a nice, clean-ish trunk, and then sectioning that into sections to make them transportable back to your camp area. Once we'd seen the demo, we all paired off into little groups and we went to identify our own tree to fell. Lots of things to take into account there, the direction of fall, escape routes, things getting hung up in trees as it's falling, making sure there's no debris on the ground that can cause the tree to bounce and cause other hazards. So lots to think about. Once we'd all identified a tree to fell, Paul came along, confirmed that was okay. Once he'd confirmed that everybody was okay, we then proceeded on a tree by tree basis for safety's sake and also from a learning perspective to watch everybody else fell their trees, and Jim and I felled ours. We then limbed that tree and took off the side branches, we sectioned them, and then became a significant piece of work lugging all of those relatively heavy and cumbersome, some people's were more heavy and cumbersome than others, tree trunks or sections of tree trunks back to the camp area where we put them to one side. Once we'd done that, and that took a significant amount of the day, as you can imagine, once we've done that, Paul gave us a demo on making a mallet that we were going to use the next day, i.e. today, and we all went away and made a mallet. Also, Ian then gave us a demonstration on making gluts. They're a wooden wedge, if you like, to drive into these sections of trees that we'd felled to help split them. We all then went away and made a pair of gluts for use the next day, i.e. today. And then when that was done, we made a slightly different firelay for yesterday evening's meal, which, if you remember, is one of the things that I wanted to take away from this course, was using one fire but to cook in different ways. And we had a section of the fire that was just hot embers for cooking steak on, which we did, and a section of the fire that was a more faster burning, flame heavy section of the fire for boiling water, which we boiled some green beans and potatoes in. So another good evening's meal last night, lots of food to go around, and then it was a relatively early night. There were no evening lectures, so I turned in for the evening. So that was day 4, Thursday over and done with. Let's see what day 5, Friday, today has in store. It's Saturday morning, so let's have a look back at what we did on day 5 of the course, which was Friday. On the Thursday, as I said previously, many of us went out and felled trees, and I think I was the only person that actually didn't get to fell a tree because the guy that I was with sort of did the whole process from beginning to end. So we got up yesterday morning, we went down to one of the lower areas on the estate, and I felled a silver birch tree, quite a large one, and I felt it was quite accurate where it dropped. All went safely. We all walked away at the end of it, so it was a successful felling. We limbed that, we sectioned it, and then we brought it back up from the lowest area on the estate to one of the highest areas on our shoulders. That was good fun. Up the hill, where Paul then proceeded to help us process it down and show us how to carve some other utensils. We'd carved spatulas earlier on in the week. This time we turned our attention to carving stirring spoons or serving spoons. So something with a little bit more of a profile and working on the bowl of the spoon. So that was interesting. I took quite a lot of time over that because I made a bit of a hash of my spoon on the elementary bushcraft course. I wanted to take more time and care and attention on this one. It's not finished as of recording this video, but it is definitely something that I want to take back home and actually get to a workable condition. But as you can see in this photo here, it's not far off, I think, a finished product. So that was quite enjoyable. We then used some of that silver birch to then make a chopping board, or start to make a chopping board to help chop food or serve food up, or even just as a wooden plate. That was quite interesting to learn about the way that the grain can work for or against you. Once we'd done that, Paul took us through a process for helping us set up multiple pots over a fire, 2 tripods and a crossbeam support. And my particular group then set up an alternate firelay, which was one of the things I wanted to take from this course. We had a large area of the fire that was hot embers, where we had 3 Dutch ovens, each with a roast chicken in, and then we had another area of the fire where we could have done a faster burn, more of a flame type fire, where we could boil water. We also used it as a feeder fire for feeding embers underneath the Dutch ovens. So I was pleased that we looked at that, because that was something that I really wanted to get out of the day. So it doesn't sound like a great deal, but trust me, it was a very, very long day yesterday. Lots to do, lots to learn, and I'm looking forward to the final day, which is today, which is Saturday, day 6 of the course. Today is Sunday, which means that yesterday was Saturday, which unfortunately means that that was the final day of the course. So in this short final piece of video, I want to give a rundown on what we did on the final day, and also my overall thoughts and takeaways from the course itself. So day 6, the Saturday, we spent quite a lot of time looking at some of the very long, thick logs that we transported from areas of the estate earlier on in the week, and we looked at using splitting axes, I think, mauls, and in particular the use of those metal wedges and those wooden gluts, look at me with the terminology, to help split those long thick logs down into thinner diameter sections into planks that we could then use for all sorts of things. And one of the guys, Gordo, went away and actually made an improvised seat out of the two halves of a log. He made an improvised bench with a backrest and everything. So we spent quite a bit of time doing that. Many of us got the opportunity to practice using the maul to hit the steel wedges in and the wooden gluts and to watch that log split apart. So that was a good exercise in terms of being able to try and utilise every single piece of wood that we harvested in the week, not just the thinner, smaller, more easily handled pieces of wood. We could also do something with those big old beastly pieces as well. They weren't going to waste. So we spent quite a bit of time doing that. Paul then took us away and showed us another little project around making a 3-legged stool for out in the woods. I made one. It barely held my weight, but I thought to myself, you know what, don't worry about it, take it home, let my very small, petite, waif like 7-year-old daughter sit on it, and it barely held air weight as well. So my engineering and woodwork skills aren't quite up to scratch there, but there was an interesting aspect that Paul showed there, 2 interesting aspects. The use of an auger or an auger to help drill out a hole, and also the use of small, thin wooden wedges in the end of a split branch to help force that branch out. So whilst the stool itself wasn't necessarily a success, there were some interesting takeaways from the process itself, if not the overly successful outcome. Some of us then went to work on those stools. Some of us then went away and used some lashings that Paul had shown us to help create a new kitchen and hand washing and drying area in this campsite, and other people went away and carried on working on some of their other projects. So today was kind of aside from the stool and the long log splitting, it was a finishing off your projects sort of thing, and everybody still had something that they needed to finish off. So it was a good final use of time, making the use of time in the woods, the atmosphere, and of course the Frontier Bushcraft team being on hand to advise along the way. When that was over, we tidied up the camp. We left most of it still up because Paul and his team was running a 1-day course the following day, so we didn't have to strip the camp down entirely, and we all went our separate ways back to our vehicles. At the end, we got walked back down to our vehicles and we all went our separate ways, and here I am the following day to tell the tale. So that was the final day. Let's have a look at the course overall then. It was 6 days, and I thought the elementary course that I went on a year ago, I thought that was the peak, if you like, of what could be achieved in terms from a teaching process out in the woods. And the last week proved me wrong, because Paul just raised the bar even higher in what people were able to do, what he was able to teach, and what people were able to take away. I don't think anybody should ever or could ever complain going on a Frontier Bushcraft course that they are ever shortchanged in terms of the time that the team gives them. The days formally started at 8:30 AM each day. The days finished when they finished. Sometimes it was 9, sometimes it was 10, sometimes 10:30. On one of the evenings it was just gone midnight, and the training team, Paul, Ian and Amanda, huge thank you to you 3, were on hand every moment of that time. So nobody, I think, should ever complain about being shortchanged and it being a very 9 to 5 course. That's absolutely not what you got. It's not what we got on the elementary, and it's not what we got on the Woodcraft there. And despite being tired and hanging out at times, I'm sure with retrospect everyone is very, very appreciative of the time that the team puts in to get everybody where they need to be or where they want to be. So it's a busy old 6 days. What did I want to achieve? Well, if we think back, I wanted to be more competent and confident from felling to fire, and I am. I mentioned earlier on in the video that I've got some permission to go away and to fell some trees, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to try and harvest as much of that tree from what Paul has shown us either today or what he's shown us previously, such as natural cordage. So I'm going to have a practice at felling a tree, a substantial size tree, something akin to what we were doing on the course, and then harvesting that. I also wanted to look at different firelays and recipes, and I've got something of a repertoire now lined up. It also prompted me to go away and buy a new book by, I think it's Tim Gents. It's at home at the moment, so that arrived earlier this morning. So that's inspired me to go away and to continue those fire skills, those advanced firelay skills, if you like, and some different recipes. I also wanted to find some wild garlic. Despite me putting a plea out to everybody on the first day of the course, nobody seemed to spot any wild garlic, and I didn't spot any either with my eyes or with my nose. I just didn't come across any wild garlic whilst we were out there. So I'll keep that on the to-do list, if you like, in the future. It was a great week. Everybody dug out on the course. I've already said a big thank you to Paul and the team. I'm going to say it again. Paul, Ian, Manda, a huge thank you for everything that you did in the run up to the course, behind the scenes. I know there's a lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes, and also front and centre on stage itself, the teaching and the supervision. A huge thank you, and a massive thank you to everyone on the course, and in particular, of course, it would be remiss of me not to say to the little group that self-formed that I was in. There was myself, there was Jim, there was Richard, and there was Gordo. Guys, you three, as well as many other people on course, but you three really made my week. The banter was fantastic. The digs and the pokes at one another were relentless, and I really enjoyed that. I learned something from each and every one of you guys. Looking forward to catching up with you in the near future. So a big thanks for making that week even more enjoyable than it was. Thanks Jim, thanks Richard, thanks Gordo. Thanks to everyone on the course, and thanks to you, dear viewer, for sticking with this incredibly long video. I hope you've gained something from it. If not anything from me, maybe some of the photographs that you've seen that I took on the course, maybe it's inspired you to go and have a look at the Woodcrafter course itself. I'm going to put a link below this on YouTube. If you want to have a look at the course in a bit more detail, click on the link below this in the description on YouTube, and you'll be able to go through and take a close look at the course itself. I believe they've all ran for this year now, so you may be looking at putting it in your diary for next year. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If there's anything you want to comment on, please do so below, either on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, and let's have a conversation about it. And if you're not yet a subscriber, in this corner of the screen here, there's a small icon. Click on that, and you'll become a subscriber, and you'll be kept updated on all of my future videos. As always, a big thanks for watching. Take care. I'll see you soon. Cheers.